On June 9, 2024, a 50-year-old agreement that secured America's economic dominance quietly ended. Though it wasn't front-page news, the event signals a massive crack in the foundation of the petrodollar system. This isn't just a story about money or oil. It's the story of a hidden economic architecture that has powered our world for half a century. A secret deal, born from crisis, that made the US dollar the undisputed king of the global economy. So, let's uncover that secret deal. We'll trace the origins of the petrodollar from the ashes of World War II to the high-stakes negotiations in Saudi Arabia. We'll break down how this system works, how it allowed the United States to project its power across the globe, and what its unraveling could mean for your money, your cost of living, and the future of the world order. To understand the petrodollar, you must first understand the world before it. In 1944, as World War II ended, leaders from 44 Allied nations gathered in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Their mission was to create a new global economic order to prevent the chaos that had led to the war. At the heart of their plan was the US dollar. The United States, holding most of the world's gold, made a simple promise. Any country could exchange its US dollars for gold at a fixed rate of $35 an ounce. This was the Bretton Woods Agreement, and it made the US dollar as good as gold. Other countries pegged their currencies to the dollar, creating a stable system for international trade. This established the dollar as the world's primary reserve currency. For a time, the system worked, fueling a post-war economic boom and cementing America's place at the center of global finance. But this golden age had a fatal flaw. The United States had made a promise it couldn't keep. By the late 1960s, the costs of the Vietnam War and expensive social programs led the US to print more dollars than it had gold to back them. Other nations, particularly in Europe, grew nervous and began trading their dollars for America's dwindling gold reserves. A run on US gold was imminent, threatening to bring the entire system crashing down. The breaking point came on August 15, 1971. In a televised address, President Richard Nixon announced he was, temporarily, suspending the dollar's convertibility into gold. Known as the Nixon shock, this move permanently shattered the Bretton Woods system. The dollar was no longer tied to gold, it was now a fiat currency, backed only by the full faith and credit of the US government. The world's financial anchor was gone. The immediate result was chaos. The US dollar's value plunged, and currency markets fell into turmoil. But the real crisis was just beginning. The world's most important commodity, oil, was priced in US dollars. As the dollar's value fell, oil-producing nations watched their revenues disappear in real time. Then, in October 1973, geopolitics ignited the crisis. In retaliation for US support of Israel during the Yom Kippur War, the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries, OAPEC, led by Saudi Arabia, declared an oil embargo against the United States and its allies. The world was plunged into its first global oil shock. The price of oil quadrupled almost overnight, jumping from around $3 to nearly $12 a barrel. Gas stations in America saw massive lines, and the industrialized world was brought to its knees, revealing its profound dependence on foreign oil. For the United States, it was a moment of extreme vulnerability. Washington desperately needed a new way to anchor the dollar, and in the chaos, an opportunity was found not in a vault of gold, but beneath the sands of the Saudi desert. In 1974, U.S. Treasury Secretary William Simon undertook a crucial mission to Saudi Arabia. The proposal he carried would reshape global finance for the next 50 years. The informal deal was simple but profound. In exchange for American military protection and weapons, Saudi Arabia would do two things. First, it would price all of its oil exports exclusively in U.S. dollars. Any country wanting to buy Saudi oil, and soon all OPEC oil, would have to pay in American currency. This move created a massive, permanent global demand for the dollar. Second, Saudi Arabia would invest its surplus oil profits, its petrodollars, back into the United States by purchasing U.S. Treasury bonds, the debt that finances the American government. This arrangement created a perfect, self-sustaining loop known as petrodollar recycling. The world needs oil. To buy oil, countries need U.S. dollars. Oil producers are then flooded with dollars, which they recycle by buying U.S. debt, helping finance America's budget deficits at lower interest rates. It was an economic perpetual motion machine. This understanding, solidified by the U.S.-Saudi Arabian Joint Commission on Economic Cooperation on June 8, 1974, was the birth of the petrodollar system. It re-established the dollar's dominance by tying it to the world's most vital commodity. The gold standard was dead. Long live the oil standard. So, what did this new system mean for America? It created what one French finance minister famously called an exorbitant privilege. By forcing the world to use its currency for oil, America gained incredible advantages. This dynamic applies to nearly every country, creating a structural dependency on the dollar. Because everyone needs dollars for energy, it becomes the default currency for trading almost everything else, from coffee to copper. For the United States, the benefits were immense. It could run massive trade deficits, buying more from the world than it sold, because the dollars it sent abroad would come flooding back to buy US debt. This constant demand for treasury bonds meant lower borrowing costs, as oil-exporting nations became a guaranteed market, essentially helping to finance America's government spending. Perhaps most powerfully, the system became a geopolitical weapon. Since the US controls the dollar-based financial system, it can impose sanctions that effectively cut adversaries off from the global economy. It also allowed the US to export its inflation. When the Federal Reserve creates more money, the enormous global demand for dollars helps absorb that new supply, spreading the inflationary pressure across the world. The petrodollar system wasn't just an economic deal, it was a pillar of American power. A system that gives one nation such an advantage is bound to face challenges. Over the decades, a few leaders dared to defy the petrodollar, and many analysts argue the consequences served as a stark warning. One notable challenger was Iraq's Saddam Hussein. In late 2000, Hussein announced Iraq would no longer accept dollars for its oil, switching all sales to the euro. While some dismissed it as a stunt, it was a direct attack on the petrodollar system. A few years later, the US invaded Iraq. Though the official rationale was weapons of mass destruction, many believe a key motive was to make an example of a major oil producer breaking from the dollar. After the invasion, Iraq's oil sales were switched back to US dollars. Another challenger was Libya's Muammar Gaddafi. Before the 2011 NATO-led intervention, Gaddafi was championing a plan for a unified, gold-backed African currency, the gold dinar. This was intended for selling oil, creating a direct alternative to the dollar. Leaked emails from then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton revealed this plan was viewed as a threat to the financial order. Soon after, a NATO-led intervention resulted in Gaddafi's overthrow and death, and the gold dinar plan died with him. Whether these military actions were caused by challenges to the dollar is hotly debated. However, the outcomes sent an unmistakable message: defy the dollar at your own peril. For 50 years, the system held. But today, the cracks are impossible to ignore. The world is actively building a financial order that moves beyond the dollar, and the end of the 50-year pact with Saudi Arabia on June 9, 2024 is the most symbolic moment yet. To be clear, there wasn't a single petrodollar treaty with an expiration date. Rather, the security and economic agreements that formed the bedrock of the alliance were not renewed. Saudi Arabia is now free to sell its oil in any currency it chooses, like the Chinese yuan. This is just one piece of a much larger trend: de-dollarization. A major driver of this shift is the rise of the BRICS nations: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. A bloc now including major oil producers like Saudi Arabia and the UAE. These countries view the weaponization of the dollar through sanctions as a significant risk and are motivated to build a multipolar economic world. And it's not just talk. BRICS nations are increasingly settling trade in local currencies, bypassing the dollar. Saudi Arabia has joined Project mBridge, a digital currency platform that enables cross-border payments without touching the US financial system. The numbers back this up. The dollar's share of global reserves has fallen from over 71% in 2001 to around 58% today, a clear sign that central banks are diversifying. So, what does a world with a weaker petrodollar system look like? It's unlikely to be replaced by a single currency overnight. Instead, we are likely heading toward a multipolar currency world, where the dollar, euro, yuan, and perhaps digital currencies coexist. For the United States, the erosion of its exorbitant privilege could have profound consequences. Without guaranteed global demand for dollars and treasury bonds, the US government would likely face higher borrowing costs. Financing its massive national debt would become far more expensive. For the average American, the most direct impact could be higher inflation and a higher cost of living. Without the rest of the world absorbing newly printed dollars, more inflationary pressure would stay home. The era of cheap imported goods, fueled by a super-strong dollar, could draw to a close. A weaker dollar would also reduce America's geopolitical leverage, as the power of its economic sanctions would be diminished. This transition won't happen instantly. The dollar is too deeply woven into the fabric of global finance to disappear. But the direction of travel is clear. The 50-year-old system that defined the modern global economy is fraying. From the Nixon shock of 1971 to the secret deal of 1974, the petrodollar system was a geopolitical masterstroke that secured a half-century of American economic supremacy. It forced the world to need dollars, funded American deficits, and projected U.S. power across the globe. But today, that world is changing. The rise of new powers, the creation of alternative financial systems, and a deep shift in global alliances are converging to unwind the very system that has defined modern finance. The slow unraveling of the petrodollar isn't just a financial headline. It marks the end of an era and the dawn of a new, uncertain, and multipolar economic world. What do you think a world without total petrodollar dominance looks like? Will it lead to more instability or a more balanced global economy?